Welcome to Jumpstart, the India Today e-Conclave. The Modi government is pushing the idea of an Aatmanirbhar Bharat, trying to turn adversity into opportunity and using the crisis to unleash long-term structural reform that will hopefully set India on the path of high growth. But what will it take to make India self-reliant? The government wants global manufacturing, especially companies with production lines in China, to move to India. But at a time when demand is low and there is already excess capacity, are international investors really looking to make the switch? Joining me on this special edition of Jumpstart is one of the sharpest business minds of the Narendra Modi government, a man who understands numbers and what it takes to run businesses. Union Minister for Commerce, Industry and Railways, Mr. Piyush Goyal. Minister, welcome. To give us a sense of what top corporates cutting across steel, mining, private equity and consulting and infrastructure think of the government's moves, I am delighted to be joined on this conversation by Sajjan Jindal, Chairman and Managing Director of the JSW Group. He has substantial interests cutting across steel, mining, energy and infrastructure. For a sense of what international companies are thinking about India, we have the big deal maker himself. Fresh off the successful conclusion of an 11,000 crore rupee deal with Mukesh Ambani's Jio platforms, we are joined on Jumpstart by Sanjay Nayar. Sanjay is the Chief Executive Officer and Country Head of Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts and Company, better known as KKR. Sanjay, welcome. For a sense of what top global consultants are thinking about getting back to business after Corona and to understand where India stands in the global evaluation matrix, we have the Chairman of the Boston Consulting Group in India, Janmejaya Sinha. Welcome. Government spending on public infrastructure is generally seen as the most effective way of bouncing back from a deep recession. We are joined by the go-to man for all things to do with infrastructure in India, Chairman of Feedback Infra Private Limited, Vinayak Chatterjee. Welcome to all our guests. Can we kickstart this conversation by asking Minister Piyush Goyal to talk about what is different about the government's approach this time round? A lot of what is being said now has been promised by your government in the past. Can you explain to everyone watching, sir, how you hope to achieve the idea of a self-reliant India?
Thank you, Rahul. At the outset, I'd like to pay my condolences to all those who lost their lives in the Amphan cyclone, in the COVID pandemic. And I'm sure all the others will recover quickly and come back to normalcy at the earliest. India over the last 6 years has been on a fast-paced journey to reinvent itself and take the fruits of development to every citizen of this country. In fact, in the last 6 years, if one was to map each of the projects that Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi has initiated and successfully taken to the last man at the bottom of the pyramid, you will realize the importance of those steps in our fight against COVID. Be it a simple thing like opening a bank account, the Chandhan account, or the fast spread of Aadhaar cards so that almost every Indian has an identity under Aadhaar, with most people also having a mobile. The Jam Trinity, Chandhan, Aadhaar and mobile, helped us create the direct benefit transfer, which helped us reach out to the people in need in this hour of crisis. Our own effort to ensure that Digital India spreads to the nook and corner of the country is paying us rich dividends today, when the country was under a lockdown but was connected through internet and television. The effort to ensure that electricity reaches every home, a massive transmission network rollout, electricity given free of charge to the poor at their home, the connection at their homes, in the farms, has helped us tide over this difficult period when nobody was struggling for basic amenities. Countries are recognizing that we have to create self-reliance, we have to create an empowered set of people where we are in times of emergency self-sufficient. And you will observe that India's strength over the last many years has shown that we can be a self-sufficient, self-reliant economy, self-reliant country. But when we talk of Aatmanirbhar Bharat, we talk of a better quality of life for our people. We talk of businesses and our economy prospering while engaging with the rest of the world. So it's not an inclusive thought. It's not just that we are going to get into our own shell and not engage with the rest of the world. The idea behind Aatmanirbhar Bharat is recognize your strengths, exploit them to the maximum, do what you can do best within the country, engage with like-minded countries, democratic, where there's a rule of law, where there's a prevalent free trade which is honest and transparent with each other, engage with them and find your comparative and competitive advantages in areas where you can literally lead to global dominance in your country, thereby providing jobs, providing economic opportunities for
So we'll build on some of this. I want to go across to the top corporates who are joining us for this conversation, and I'll start by asking Sajjan Jindal what he thinks of this idea of a self-reliant Bharat, because at this moment the critical challenge is survival. Companies very worried about whether they'll be left standing at the end of the COVID crisis. The government thinks it's an opportunity for a long-term reset. How are you decoding the messaging that's coming from the country, from the government, and are you enthused by what you're hearing, Mr. Sajjan Jindal?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rahul. Actually, there is a saying that one should not let a crisis go waste. And I think this government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, is really working to see that this crisis is turned into an opportunity, and we can make India a self-reliant India and Aatmanirbhar India, and make Indian industry strong. You know, in '91, when we were faced with the crisis of bankruptcy as a country, at that time the then government really took initiatives and steps, and India wouldn't have been what it is today had that crisis not been utilized the way it was utilized. So I think in all, I would say that this time the government of Modi government is really working very hard to fix the issues that Indian industry is facing, and trying to make India a self-reliant country. When I said that, that means that India has everything in the country itself. We have all the minerals, we have all the possibilities of extracting those minerals, and we can, because we are a large country with a very large land mass and a large home market. So making India a self-reliant country is not a very difficult task, and it just needs a very focused approach from the government to allow the minerals to be used. For example, we import 200 million and over 200 million tons of coal for power generation. Now, and we are sitting on top of so much coal which will last us more than 200 years. And everybody knows that coal doesn't have, coal utility will be exhausted or will be over in next 10 to 20 years. So therefore, there is no point in burning $20 billion of foreign exchange in importing this coal. And recently, the government of India has, under the self-reliant Aatmanirbhar Bharat, Prime Minister Modi has come out with a reform where all the minerals will be exploited, and the industry which is based on minerals will prosper, and we will be able to not only meet the domestic demand, but actually India can be a major producer of products which is based on minerals and export to the world.
Okay.
So, like China has been a big exporter of products, India can definitely do that. And all these industries which are moving out of China is again a great opportunity for India to grab this opportunity and build industries in India and be the factory. India has been the IT back office of the world, but why India cannot be a manufacturing hub for the world? So what China was, and today, given the environment and given the situation, I think India has a great opportunity to become the factory for the world and supply products out of India
But
using
Sanjay
the raw
Nayar,
materials.
some of
produced
what
in India.
the government is talking about now has been spoken of in the past as well. We've seen international studies that say that out of the companies that chose to move out of China, many went to Vietnam, some chose to go to Indonesia, some even to Bangladesh, very few in the past have come to India. Are you seeing anything different this time around? You're speaking to companies the world over. How is India being perceived globally? How many companies that are looking to move out of China, do you believe, are interested in exploring the idea of coming and doing business in India?
Yeah, Rahul, can you hear me?
I hear you well.
Okay, great. I think a lot of people are considering putting up manufacturing options, and clearly India is, I would say, one of the 5 options they're considering. I think taking off from Sajjan's point, it is upon ourselves to do the requisite reforms to attract that. I don't think it is lack of marketing or lack of knowing what India is. People love India for its democracy, for its upholding of contract law, no issues. I think the simple thing is that we've got to make sure we make doing business here easy, which I think the government is extremely focused on. It's got to be put into practice, have some successful examples, and then showcase those. And I think the virtuous cycle will start. And the only second thing I want to add, if you want people to really come up here and take the opportunity by its, as I say, sort of, hands-on, then I think we've got to have a pretty strong local financial sector. You can't keep depending on foreign money all the time. You've got to have deep capital markets and a robust banking system. And those are the kind of reforms we need to see now. Because when we come out of COVID and everything, I think you want to make sure that you have a sustainable manufacturing kind of base here.
Sanjay, can I ask you to build on what you're saying? The reality of the last few years is international manufacturing that did move out of China didn't really come to India. Why did that happen? What do you believe needs to be done now by Minister Goyal, by the entire government to ensure that the talk is translated into action? What specific would you like to see?
I would say that I think there is a certain amount of kind of fragmentation in the approval process and a fragmentation in how things get processed. Where if Minister Goyal can probably centralize it there, because he's got commerce and industry with him, then you have a single window to clear a lot of projects. And I'm not talking of big projects. I'm talking of smaller ones, those that represent elements of supply chain. I think people still find it difficult and are a little confused where they go for what. So one is centralization of decision making, and I'm sure that his office or his ministry can then go and garner a lot of support from others. So that's really what I think. People want to see a few success stories. And look, if anybody can do it, this government can do it. There's a lot of conviction, extremely hardworking, and it's a great opportunity to really catalyze this movement on the back of COVID. Frankly.
Minister, can you build on what is different this time around in our approach? We've been trying to pull manufacturing out of China for the last several years. That project hasn't been the best success so far. What gives you confidence that it will be different this time around? How is your approach different, Minister?
The difference this time around is twofold. A, there is more public acceptance for many of these reform steps, which in the normal course would have got engulfed in political controversies. B, the rest of the world is also looking for alternate strategies in their supply chains, and India figures high on their list as a trusted and reliable partner on whom they can depend. And I think we can see that as almost on a daily basis. The number of inquiries that Invest India, which is the nodal agency handling all these inquiries, both domestic and international, is receiving regularly. We have 600 active engagements going on right now, where we are talking to companies both in India and internationally. I personally am engaging with a lot of corporates, Indian and international, to see how we can bring that mojo back into the investment cycle. My own sense is India will be amongst the first countries to recover out of COVID because we have 130 crore aspirational Indians. This local demand is going to be the driver of investments, which will also give us higher quality products manufactured to scale, bringing competitive edge to their pricing, and therefore making them competitive also in the export market.
Janmejaya, Sinha, BCG does consulting globally. Sanjay and I made an important point that India is one of 5 options, which means you have about a 20% chance of whatever companies looking to move out of China possibly wanting to relocate to India. How is India perceived, in your view, by companies that are looking to move out of China? And I was reading a study done by the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, which actually said that several companies that are manufacturing in China are coming to the conclusion that business bounced back faster in China because they were able to contain the virus better than Europe and the United States. And therefore, is that fundamental premise that business is looking to relocate even true? How are you viewing India's chances in trying to attract investment that may potentially be wanting to get out of China?
So the first thing is that the world we will go back to was not the world we left. And we really need to understand that. There is no way in hell that any company will ever be that dependent on China again. Supply chains will be rebalanced. This Cold War that will ensue in the coming months and then in the coming years is going to be as fierce and as strong as the one during the Soviet Union and the USA time. If you just saw yesterday, the Senate passed a bill about delisting Chinese companies on the US stock exchanges. And this is just the precursor of everything that is going to come. There are going to be 2 technology standards, and countries are going to have to navigate with great skill between these 2 blocks that are going to emerge. And they will emerge. That's my prediction. Now, of course, that means that there is a big opportunity of exports that China does to the US and Japan and Germany. There is a lot of risk in the supply chains that will get opened and that will be reconsidered. And, I can't imagine that Apple will have 85% of its handsets going through China. That kind of risk, I don't believe companies would be wanting to take. Having said that, given that there is an opportunity, every country that is out there wants to take it. And there is going to be fierce competition. There are a set of things we will have to do. There are a set of things that were announced in some of the reforms that were announced recently. The biggest one by far, which we are not celebrating right now, which is, I think, of the same order of magnitude as the GST, was the agriculture reforms that were announced. I mean, really, they are far-reaching and they are big.
What would you like to see? You're asking for more reforms. Specifically, what policy interventions would you like to see from the government?
So exactly. So there I feel that the Indian manufacturing suffers from 2 basic things and 2 or 3 small things, which are big things in some ways. The cost of capital is very high in India. The cost of power is very high in India. And then there are issues around predictability of policy and the irritants that are there in getting permission here and there, which are, which the government is trying to unwind. But it's not that easy. Some fall in state governments and some fall in other places. So you take solar panels. What is solar panels? Solar panels is a cost of capital gain. And so, the smallest utility in China, the smallest company in China that makes solar panels makes more than all of India's capacity. So those are kind of discrepancies that we have.
Minister Goyal, you want to respond to this predictability of policy, uncertainty of contract execution, cost of capital and the cost of power? Do you want to respond to these concerns and how you are hoping to address them?
Is that for me?
Yes, sir.
Well, very clearly, these are the most important elements that any investor, both in India or internationally, would be looking for. Over the last almost 3 or 4 months, we've been engaged with industry on a deep dive to assess which are the sectors where we have maximum resonance and capabilities to be able to engage with the rest of the world. And there's a lot of effort going in, which is private sector led. So we have our Indian industry, which has formed a team along with CII, FICCI, ASSOCHAM, and they are assessing the need for policy change in several sectors, which can help us really evolve as a manufacturing hub, take our manufacturing to $1 trillion level, that's about 75 lakh crore rupees, and see if we can also look for $1 trillion export business going forward. Again, 75 lakh rupees of exports. Both of these having some overlap and also having huge potential for jobs. Clearly, policy stability is a very, very important element that comes out of every interaction. You can clearly see there are disadvantages in the cost of power and the cost of logistics to some extent, which have to be addressed. Cost of capital, interest cost, we've of course been able to reduce over the last 2 or 3 years. But we still have a long way to go. We still need to see that fall by at least another 150 basis points. And these are areas, each one of these, which we are addressing. But we'll have to work with the states. We recognize that. And what we are doing is that we are engaging with the states in a competitive framework, throwing a challenge to the states to accept in terms of will they give a firm price for power for 10 years at least? Which are the states which are willing to look at improving the environment for labor? Which are the states which are ready to give single window clearances and ensure all approvals in a time-bound manner without bureaucracy, cutting the red tape, mostly digital? Which are the states which are willing to go that extra mile in terms of hand-holding industry along with the center? So it'll be a collaborative effort. I'm delighted to share with you one of the first states which came forward and called me up and said, look, you have a blank paper, you tell me what has to be done and we want to do it, was Uttar Pradesh. Maharaj Yogi Adityanath, the Honorable Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, has been more proactive than any other state in the country in terms of wanting to attract investments. Goa Chief Minister, he's been at my back that we really want to push investments into Goa for environment-friendly products. Help us and we're ready to do what you advise us. Different states at different levels are coming forward. Telangana has done good work in terms of attracting pharmaceutical and the API industry. So we are looking at sectoral focus and working with the states to debureaucratize, cut the red tape. I can share with you some of the sectors. They are very, very exciting opportunities in India. The scale at which we are looking at transforming is not small. For example, furniture. We've done a very deep dive into furniture. We had a presentation last Friday by all the experts from the industry along with one of the international consulting firms. And we believe furniture alone has a potential to expand manufacturing to $50 billion in India. That's 3,50,000 crores. Not a small amount. It can provide over 25, 30 lakh people with quality, well-paying jobs or working opportunities. Our carpenters will be recognized the world over and nobody will ever have to go to Milan to buy furniture or Miami or Dubai. They will all come to India to buy furniture. We have that self-confidence. We have the ability. We are working in partnership with industry, with experts to see how we can engage and enable all of them to succeed.
Vinayak Chatterjee, what do you make of the government's approach so far? Internationally, there's a lot of wage protection support that the government in, for example, the United Kingdom, the US has offered. In India, the government's offering liquidity. Do you believe that by itself is adequate to help most companies sail through this crisis? What do you make of the approach? What more would you like to see?
Okay, that's probably the most relevant question of the times we're living in. Different sectors of the economy have different needs. Very clearly, the MSME segment was crying out for liquidity. They need liquidity to survive and to wake up next morning and be ready to start their units to satisfy whatever orders come their way. The demand of the semi-large and the larger industries in India is to actually see demand stimulation. So far as MSMEs are concerned, I think government has taken the right step in crafting a bunch of very credible measures involving the Reserve Bank, including the public and private sector banks, to actually push and mandate liquidity into the pipelines of the MSME structure in this country. So I would say in large measure that need has been addressed. Now let's come to the issue of demand stimulation. The current flavor among Indian businessmen, among India's think tankers, policy watchers, is that the time has now come to take some very dramatic steps in stimulating demand.
Like what?
Now,
what
in such cases, history and economic history Sorry, so what I would like to see is of announcements of massive levels of public works. Public works has been traditionally tried and tested as the biggest demand stimulator to pick an economy up by the bootstraps. And therefore, because a large number of migrant laborers have gone back to Bharat, have gone back to their villages, have gone back to the hinterland, immediately unleashing major and minor irrigation works, Nal Se Jal, roads, particularly district roads and rural roads, programs of this nature need to be kick-started so that the multiplier effects of employment, steel, cement is huge.
From the time of the New Deal, at the time of the Great Depression,
Yep.
the whole idea has been to push through government-funded public infrastructure projects, which really set the United States, for example, on a path of growth which lasted for several decades. And that was part of the expectation, Minister Goyal, that you would announce massive public infrastructure projects. That hasn't happened, which has led many to believe, does the government have the revenue? Is it struggling? Does it have the finances? Does it have the imagination to be able to find the revenue mobilization, the resource mobilization to push ahead with such a massive public works project?
Rahul, if you don't mind, may I jog your memory a little bit? About 6 months ago, I think it was in December end or January, when the Honorable Finance Minister had announced a pipeline of 100 lakh crore rupees worth of infrastructure projects. Some of them ongoing, some of them on the drawing board, some of them visualized for the future. A lot of them were railway projects which we are hoping to do in public-private partnership. A lot of them were power transmission and expansion of the power grid. The roads, particularly the rural roads that Vinayak just talked about. Our program to invest heavily, about 3.5 lakh crores, so that every household gets water from a tap. Now, these are ongoing things. And I would like to urge all the panelists and you to consider that government is not static. Government is a continuing entity. You have to see our intention and our plans right from the time the second term started, how we have systematically focused on preparing India for the future. And all those projects are not aborted. All those plans are not aborted. They're going to get strength from the COVID-19. Also, the package is the first set of measures that have come out. It will continue going forward in terms of specificities. So you will find a lot more coming up regularly, looking at the situation, looking at how the situation evolves. The COVID story is after all not over. You cannot assume that today, having announced that package, we all know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow and we can map out the post-COVID world. We still have to wait, watch,
you want to
see the
respond to the
appropriate
concern
time
that's
when the demand
raised
stimulus
that a
will
lot of
really
your
have an
measures have
impact.
been on the supply
It's
side,
a
Minister.
continuing process that will continue into the future.
In the current context, there has been a lot of commentary from virtually every brokerage, economic research house, which says that the government's interventions have largely been on the supply and liquidity side, and not enough has been done to address the basic question of stimulating demand. How do you respond to that concern?
Well, in my humble view, I think demand and investment or supply go hand in hand. After all, when you are investing deeply into the economy, be it in terms of infrastructure projects, be it in terms of getting the MSMEs back into action, be it in terms of our effort to promote investment, both domestic and international, all of these ultimately lead to demand. After all, if Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is given another thrust, if affordable housing is given another thrust, the 70,000 crore rupee intervention that the Honorable Finance Minister announced as a part of the package, if we're going to promote fishing, for example, because we just reviewed that sector yesterday evening with the Animal Husbandry Ministry, if the Matsya Yojana is going to invest 20,000 crores, all of these interventions, big and small, ultimately are leading to growing demand. Now, demand is not necessarily a typical story of you give out handouts or you give out vouchers or you give out cash payouts. I think we are a government which has always believed in empowerment, and we are looking at empowering our people for a sustainable future, for sustainable and better quality of life going forward.
Sanjay, a lot of the big investment in the recent past in India has come through China, and given the size of the Chinese economy, China would have been one of the big sources of investment going forward. Are you concerned that we are setting up a potentially adversarial relationship and thereby shutting the door on investment coming out of China? And what's your sense about whether companies that are looking to relocate from China are actually going to start moving in? If we are one of five, you said last time, how do we become the one that gets picked?
I think the second question first. As I said earlier, if there is a centralized window for clearance and attracting the supply chain, I think it will come to India. That's, I think, pretty clear. I would say the requirement for capital is going to be an issue. We have a financial sector that is not that strong today, but I don't think the answer is Chinese capital. I think the answer lies in developing our own local pools of capital. I think Minister Goyal has heard me say this before. There is a lot of long-term savings trapped within India itself, in the insurance sector, in the pension funds. I think there has to be a concerted effort to unlock that and bring it into the markets. Because one of the part of a self-reliant India is that you've got to be able to develop local pools of capital and risk capital, and don't mistake that with liquidity. And that has to come from the Indians to build India. So I don't really have a comment on China. I think there was never the plan to depend on China, but I would say more important is to develop local pools of savings, which we have. Just needs to be structured properly, needs interministerial coordination, requires insurance, pension, banking, SEBI all to work together. And I think we can then be truly self-reliant if we have local capital sort of available to the entrepreneurs and investors.
Mr. Sajjan, Jindal, the government's hope is that it's Indian industry and industrialists like you who will step up to the plate and invest heavily in the revival story. A lot of India Inc. already struggling with private investment, which even before the COVID crisis was at a 2-decade low. Given that capacity is already in excess, demand is uncertain going in the medium and short term, are you seriously going to be thinking about new investment? The government's putting a fair part of the onus on private sector. Do you believe that's fair as an expectation?
Look, Rahul, before I answer this question, I want to go back on the demand stimulus, how to create demand in the country. And Piyush mentioned that, he's hoping that the interest rate will come down by 150 basis points more. I've been very vocal about it, and I've been talking about it, that already over the last 1 year, RBI has reduced 200 basis points for the on the reverse repo, and that interest rate has not been passed on to the industry. Less than 100 basis points have been passed on, and to stimulate the demand, the biggest factors are two. One is the liquidity, which RBI has very well addressed, and today NBFCs and mutual funds and banks are flushed with funds, and in fact more than 7 lakh crore rupees are put back into the RBI as reverse repo, which should be discouraged by the government. And Piyush is on the program, and I'm sure he's listening to this, and I hope he takes some action to or address this issue about 7 lakh crores of reverse repo lying with the RBI. And second is this 100 basis or 250 basis points, 100 already done and 150 which Piyush mentioned. If that gets passed on to the industry and to the customers, to the retail investors, it will go a long way in stimulating demand.
Minister Goyal, you want to respond to the concern about growing debt phobia, a sense of credit aversion? Even before the COVID crisis, there was liquidity that was available, but it wasn't leading to companies wanting to go out and take that credit. Given the fact that now there is excess capacity, uncertain demand, how do you hope to address this challenge, sir?
Well, I think that says what Vinayak suggested will have an important role to play. Government will have to be more proactive, handhold the private sector, join hands with them. The credit enhancements that have been announced by the Honorable Finance Minister, the credit guarantee schemes can be put to good use in terms of encouraging bankers to lend more money, but to deserving clients. We don't want to see a repeat of 2008 to 12, where we saw indiscriminate lending, very poor quality of appraisal, a lot of NPAs being created, and excess supply into the system often leads to both mistakes and misdemeanors. So we are continuing to ensure high levels of probity and integrity in our systems, but at the same time, my own sense is that with more and more public investment, we'll be able to look at more demand stimulus also. Some part of the demand will have to wait. I think there's a lot of discretionary spending which, whatever you may do, the people will wait to see how this pans out. We'll have to play every ball as it comes. It cannot be that we visualize the 50-over match or a 5-day test match on day one. And as the situation evolves, in consistence with our basic Aatmanirbhar philosophy, in consistence with our philosophy of strengthening Indian business, strengthening 130 crore people's resolve to be self-reliant, strengthening the commitment of our people to work for a better quality of life and to provide to the world a good manufacturing base, a good services base, a trusted and reliable partner to work with. I personally believe that we will probably recover faster than any other country in the world. My own experience with exports, for example, March we saw it declining. April was a huge fall, almost 60%. May, I think, will recover half of that fall, and very soon we'll be coming back to normalcy in our international trade. Simultaneously, as we strengthen Indian industry, I'm sure a lot of unessential imports will start falling. We are currently in a very strong position in terms of our foreign exchange reserves. Our macroeconomic stability is amongst the best in the world. We leverage that and ensure that our industry gets a good and supportive environment to work in.
Janmejaya Sinha, the government has spoken of structural reform in land, labour and administration. When they touched land last time round, there was a political blowback. The government had to dilute some of its original intent behind the Land Acquisition Act. We've seen on labour already with what Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh has done, there's been a bit of a blowback. The central government labour ministry asking the state governments to look at the suspension of labour laws. What do you believe is politically executable? What can be done? How should the government approach it? What would you like to see from Minister Goyal and the government?
So, there are 3 points that I want to quickly make. One is that the nature of the recovery, there are 35 countries that have been, downgraded right now by the rating agencies. And, the rating agencies will be looking at us carefully right now. But we have a lot of fiscal space for monetization, which I don't think has been fully utilized. And if we utilize that, then we can have a V-shaped recovery, which will then allow us to actually be ahead of the curve. And we've actually studied carefully what the credit rating agencies do in their modeling and how we might actually be able to do that. So if I was to look at reform, I actually want to say that, some of the reforms that are in, the power privatization in the union territories, those are very good ones. And APMC is just not being celebrated enough. I think that's a big mistake. We should really champion it as a big reform, which we should actually, I think I'm excited about that. But we really need to do something about aggregate demand right now. And we need to do that by monetization. If banks are parking 8,35,000 crores with reverse repo, which are at a yearly loss of 24,000 crores to their P&L, that means there is very high risk aversion, and the people are not taking loans also. Because
change that. How can you change? You can't force somebody. You can offer credit at reasonable rates. How do you change that debt phobia?
Yes. So actually you don't. You actually create aggregate demand, and you create aggregate demand by actually doing public works or actually giving money to people. Actually by putting them by direct benefit transfers into their Aadhaar account. And this government is the only one that can do it because of the jam trinity. We have the Aadhaar numbers and we have to give them. The level of, of deprivation is quite substantial. The GDP this year will be, who knows, it will be in the negative territory in a substantial way. And the global economy is going to lose $10 to $12 trillion of GDP. So it's going to be a very tough year, and we need to brace up for 2 years of very serious hardship. And so we really need to create aggregate demand. The policy measures have been spot on. They've really been very good. I must congratulate it. But I think there is something which needs to happen on the aggregate
Okay,
demand.
so you're
side
advocating
so
a
that it
direct
doesn't
transfer into bank accounts as the one immediate stimulus, because we're not just dealing with an economic hardship, we're dealing also, Minister, with a humanitarian problem. And there are critics who would say your government has a long-term vision, which is great, but there are people who are hungry, they are thirsty, and that should be the concern. And you're being accused of not having done enough to give them immediate redress. You're giving them food, but you haven't given them cash. And that, Janmejaya, Sinha and many others believe, is the one way of stimulating aggregate demand. Respond to that concern, sir.
Rahul, there can always be a debate on what is enough and what is not enough. But I take your point in the right spirit. We have on our side tried to ensure adequate food grains, free food grain supply. We've ensured that the lady of the household gets free gas connection, so gas cylinders for 3 months, so that doesn't become a stress on the lady of the house. We've looked at cash transfers to the women's accounts. We've expedited the transfers to our farmers. You must recognize that about 55% of India, which depends on farming, has by and large been all right through this whole period. The farm output is expected to in fact grow, and we have expanded our food procurement program, so that food grain procurement program, so that farmers get a fair price and a fair income level, even despite the international crisis.
Okay.
So we are trying to balance the requirements of different segments, and we will, within the means of a country which after all doesn't have the levels of prosperity that the United States or Europe or some of the richer countries have. It's very easy to make very tall expectations, but one must recognize that one has to look holistically. We are in it for the long haul. We have to ensure macroeconomic stability, which is, I think, equally important, because we don't want to land up in a situation that for just a few brownie points in the short run, we'll end up causing the same people distress for several years to come, which is what happened post 2008-9. We saw a flush of funding, but it landed us into the problem of the post 2010-11 period. And I think the dual balance sheet problem that the country faced at that time, and which we inherited in 2014, is something we do not wish to see happening again.
Vinayak Chatterjee, one of the biggest concerns in getting back to business
tantrum like the past
is one of the biggest concerns in getting back to business at this time is that you've got migrants in the infrastructure sector and elsewhere who are either back in their villages, on their way to the villages. You've got industrialists wanting to restart their companies. How do you think this migrant labor problem should be addressed? Many of them have on camera said they've had it with our big cities, they don't want to come back. How do we get them back so we can get business up and running quickly? Vinayak.
Look,
Well, I'll tell
a
you
certain
my
part of
own,
them will eventually come back as
hope.
Just one by one. Vinayak Chatterjee first.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, so far as the industrial workforce and related people are concerned, they will, my feeling is that once the level of angst subsides and the economy starts reviving again, a large proportion will come back, but many won't, as you rightly alluded to. And therefore it fits in with my demand for saying we will have to stimulate aggregate demand by large public works, which will be in Bharat, which will be at the doorstep of their villages, like piped water, like minor and major irrigation works, like rural roads. We will have to step up the gas there. And one of the suggestions I have now, this public works programs cuts across many ministries. But if I were to make a specific suggestion to Piyush ji, that under the hat that he wears as Minister for Commerce and Industry, one of the more powerful ideas which I believe in, and something that Dr. Panagaria also propagated hugely when he was CEO of Niti Aayog, was coastal economic zones. It achieves three purposes. It will attract FDI from China and similar other places. It will promote labor-intensive exports. It will generate massive public works in creating these coastal economic zones, and will be able to satisfy a clutch of demand revival as well as investment attraction, and be a demonstration effect for the rest of the country as to how India can create an hassle-free regulatory investment environment in real terms. 3 on the west coast, Kochi, Goa, Kandla, 3 on the east coast, Paradip, Vizag, Tuticorin. If the Industry and Commerce Ministry can apply its mind to this idea and get off the idea with 6 massive public works programs called coastal economic zones, it will have a lot of impact across various dimensions. But I'll leave that for the
Minister
consideration
Goyal, you
of
want to
Piyush.
respond to the migrant labour problem? You are telling Sajjan, Jindal and everyone else, get your industries up and running. He can turn back and say, well, some of my employees have gone back, my labourers have gone back. How do I, and many of them may not want to come back. How do you hope to tackle that challenge? Minister Goyal?
To whom is the question?
To Piyush Goyal.
Okay. Well, because the sound is not very clear. I think, first of all, I must thank Vinayak. That's a good suggestion. And I can assure you and all your panelists, co-panelists, this is a listening government that draws from the ideas that each one of you gives us and builds and expands upon that in consultation with all stakeholders. And I'm going to take you up on this idea. As regards the migrant labourers, look, let's have a heart. The fact is that everybody wants to maybe once go back to the family, see their children, meet their parents, and we must respect that sentiment. I know of people who are very well taken care of by their employers, but still wish to go back home once, meet the family, see that everything is okay. There is a certain fear that has developed seeing the situation all over the world, even in prosperous countries in the West, what happened initially in China, the rebounds or the relapse in countries like Singapore. So I think we must respect their desire to go back, be with family. All of us would like to be with our families. My mother is in Mumbai. I haven't been able to travel now for over 2 months. And I'm seriously very, very concerned and wish to go back and see her, as would every other of my brothers and sisters in this country. And we respect that. We will have to ensure that they get safe passage and meet their family. But I'm also very sure that once they have seen that everything is okay in their villages, most of them would like to come back, would like to get back to work, would like to have income levels getting restored, maybe better levels in the future. But this time around, my appeal through you, Rahul, and your debate today, to all my friends in industry, to all those who are engaged in business, let's make sure that we create that environment of working where we give them a proper place to live in, some shelter around our plants. Let's ensure proper transportation of our employees. Let's ensure even if we have contract employees, they get health care, they get some social security, they are taken care of. I think this is going to be a big lesson for all of us in India. I remember in the good old days prior to 1991, licenses, industrial licenses was one way to promote industry and businesses to go to backward areas. Post 91, one of the negative aspects of liberalization of 91 has been businesses kind of converging in the city centers or the urban agglomerates. I think it's time India also looks outward. We have to give jobs and work opportunities to people where they stay in their smaller towns, in the villages. We'll have to look at a more decentralized growth, so growth reaches the eastern parts of India. I see the future of India being quite different from what we saw in the pre-COVID world.
Before I end, Minister, I want to ask you about
the AC.
Structural changes.
COVID and after COVID is going to be very different.
The Prime Minister spoke of structural changes on land, labour and administration. No specifics have been laid out. Can you, as best as you can, give our viewers a sense of what you hope to achieve on land and labour, given that these are tricky political hot potatoes? We already saw the opposition uniting against your supposed labour reforms. We've already seen some blowback to what the Yogi Adityanath government and the Shivraj Singh Chauhan government are doing. We also know that when you tried it the last time with the land acquisition bill soon after getting elected in 2014, there was a big blowback and you had to dilute what you were hoping to do. What is it that you hope to do on land and labour? How soon do you hope to be able to do it?
Well, I think it's a continuing process and it will be a calibrated approach. In terms of land, for example, we in the railways have a lot of land. There are a lot of PSUs which have a lot of land. A lot of states have a lot of land. So our effort will be to encourage growth centers wherever we have land available with us. In terms of getting land for our projects, unless the state government is completely truant and they don't cooperate, by and large, we are able to get land. We are able to get land for our projects, for new industry. Land is not a problem, and now the farmers get a pretty good price. I have a reverse pushback very often that, you for a project you've acquired so much land, can you add some more land and take some more? So I think in terms of land availability, it's become much easier now. People are willing to give the land at a fair price, which is stipulated by law. And unless the state is totally non-cooperative, we are able to get land. In terms of labor, our approach will be both human and practical. So you certainly can't dilute any safety aspects. You certainly cannot dilute the long-term social security and health aspects. So it'll have to be a calibrated approach. By and large, my sense is that we need a little bit of tweaking here and there in terms of improving the regulatory processes. We need to make sure that there's no intrusive and, let's say, Inspector Raj coming back into the labor laws. We need to trust our businesses. We need to bring more transparency into implementation of labor laws, and that's what the world requires. I don't think the world, when they come to India, when they want to set up business, whether it's Sajjan, Jindal or any of the companies where Sanjay Nayar is invested or any project which Vinayak is consulting with or running, nobody wants to give a raw deal to the workers. They are caring people. They are caring business persons. They understand that they are our brothers and sisters. What they are only looking for is to get rid of the Inspector Raj, reduce the bureaucracy, make it nice and simple to do work. And of course, everybody wants that their workers also has a better quality of life. It is this partnership that the government wishes to strengthen.
We've had a productive conversation. I'm glad that the corporate representatives on this panel raised the concerns that they have uppermost in their minds, and the minister was willing to engage and even take notes and say that the concerns that are being raised will be acted on as well. I want to thank Sajjan Jindal, Janmejaya Sinha, Vinayak Chatterjee and Sanjay Nayar for joining us on this broadcast, and most of all Minister Piyush Goyal for agreeing to be part of this Jumpstart conversation, where we're really hoping that in the public domain there can be an engagement between corporates and government so that we can bounce back as quickly as is possible and prepare for the after Corona era. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much for tuning in.